All right, my intrepid Herle Burly-ites, let's get this potty started. Hey, you don't fail till you try, right? That's my motto. We're going to get right to it. It's our customary two-part pod today. Part one today is Senator Hassan Yussuff. Appointed as a senator just 2 weeks ago, Mr. Yussuff is the two-term past president of the Canadian Labour Congress, the first person of color to lead Canada's union movement. He's also a prominent international activist, having served 2 terms as president of the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas, representing 55 million workers in 21 countries. We're going to talk about the labor movement, what's happened to it, where it could go, and what role it plays in civil society and a just society. Part 2 of the pod is our ever-lovin political panel. Jenni from the Bloc, 34 in Fenelon Falls, and her birthday today, Scott, Reid, and me, here to bring you insights, here to bring you laughs, here to put the cuss in discuss. It's a pre-election primer this week, Herle Burly-ites. Liberals have been told to go on vacation in July, so gird yourselves for an August writ. Trudeau's freshly shaven. He clearly has a videographer following him around full-time, capturing B-roll. All the poll numbers are rolling in, and across the board, they are as consistent as my mother's Käsekuchen, her sweetened cottage cheese pie, which was delicious. The Conservatives are at shocking lows. The NDP are at their 19 or 20 with a potential breakthrough. The Greens are trying to break through to single digits, and the Bloc are trying to stave off Liberal gains in Quebec. We're going to spend this pod breaking down what all the parties need to be doing right now. And as always, stick around for our Hey Yous. Senator Yussuff, I want to welcome you to the Herle Burly. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for having me.
How are you? Where are you? How are you?
I'm in Toronto, and I'm great, actually. I'm double vaccinated, and I'm, of course, waiting for the country to catch up so we can all kind of get back to normal as soon as we can.
What have you changed since you're double vaccinated? What are you doing that you weren't doing before?
Well, I'm still doing all the same things. I'm wearing a mask, washing my hands, keeping my social distance, but recognizing, of course, not every Canadian is yet vaccinated, but importantly, we've got to keep encouraging them. To get, my bet is we'll get 92% of the country vaccinated by now and September, and I'm hoping I win that bet at the end of the day. My friends think I'm crazy, but I think I'm on track.
It's a big number. Certainly the U.S. is not going to get to that number.
Well, I think Canadians, recognize fundamentally that we got to look after each other. And more importantly, this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for your family, for your friends, for your safety. But also is good to help the country do its part to get back to a normalcy. And of course, we all have to participate in that. So there's a sense of collectivity in this whole project. And I'm part of a group that's helping to deal with vaccine hesitancy. And I'm very excited the work we're doing, but also we're trying to reach out to as many Canadians as we can to get them to do their part, encouraging them, supporting them. And of course, I think our provinces and the federal government are working really hard to ensure the vaccines that are arriving are going to get in the arms of people.
How do you feel about a vaccine passport? How do you feel about giving people proof that they're vaccinated and allowing businesses to discriminate on that basis?
Well, I think at the end of the day, this pandemic certainly has devastated the country and the rest of the world. And I think if we want to get back to a safe place, I think we're all going to do our part. I think vaccine passports will help people and encourage them to say, hey, you need to get vaccine. But ultimately, I think it's, of course, the right of Canadians who chose not to. Ultimately, I hope we can overcome some of these kind of argument and silliness we're seeing on the internet. But at the end of the day, I think goodwill is the thing we need to build on. There's a goodwill among Canadians. There's a goodwill among, of course, many of us who are working on this project because we see the greater good for the country, but also for the world.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about the labor movement. But first, I want to talk to you about you. So Wikipedia tells me that you immigrated to Canada as a young man and got a job working in an auto parts manufacturer. Is that correct?
I came here when I was 16 from Guyana, and more importantly, my first job was working at a trailer manufacturing and weren't paid very well, and decided to find another job, and that's what led me to working in a unionized establishment. So I went from $4 an hour to $7.35. The only thing I knew, there was something called a union that got me $3.35 more in my paycheck per hour. So I thought, no, whatever union means, I like it because it's getting me more money. And more importantly, I didn't come from a union family, and I had lots to learn. But within a very short time after my probation, I got lots of encouragement to go to a union meeting. And after going to actually, I didn't go to the first meeting I was asked. I was too drunk to get up and get to the meeting on a Sunday. I was asked again a month later, and my habits hadn't changed very much. But the third time I was asked, something actually popped into my brain to say, maybe I could have a few less beer on this weekend. And I did go to that meeting. And to my surprise, actually, it changed my outlook about unions and learned quite a bit. But I have to say, the one thing I did learn is that the individual who had encouraged me some 40-something years later, a guy named Bill Merlin, never judged me on my behavior. He was consistent in encouraging me to come, and finally I did go. I thought, I kind of like this. And more importantly, of course, I decided to get a little bit involved in the union. Little did I know, 6 months later, I would be elected the plant chair of my workplace. I was only 18 and a half at that time. And this long journey that took me to the Congress, of course, began right at that workplace.
And you pretty much became active in the union at that point and stayed active in the union movement right through your career. Stopped making auto parts.
Pretty well. I eventually left that workplace and actually went to General Motors, where I spent a number of years doing some apprenticeship and a whole bunch of stuff. Every time I would become a journey person, I got certified, I decided to start something new. But it was all exciting. I learned lots throughout the process, but equally the union education, things I was doing in the union really kept me hooked on the importance of the work and helping other workers in my workplace. But equally, I think it gave me an outlook where I could channel my energy into things that could help other people, which I felt fulfilled at that point in time in my life.
Cool. Okay. So if a person from 1970 time traveled to the present day, and they had left an environment where private sector unions were very powerful, where the level of unionization among private sector workforce was very high, where people had jobs with security and pensions and benefits. And that person time traveled to today and saw the state of unionization and the labor movement today. What would you tell them happened in the last 50 years?
Well, I would tell them there's a lot changing in the world that we live in today. There's lots changing in the context of work that we're dealing with. And more importantly, of course, we have to also, as a labor movement, evolve to this new reality, but also recognize that that the unionized workers in the 60s and right after the Second World War, there was a period in which there was a recognition that workers need to belong to unions. The government, of course, had legislation that allowed union to be formed and to be maintained. Of course, what we have seen starting late 80s is that there's been a constant attack, I think, on unions in the laws that's been changing, making it more difficult for workers to join unions. At the same time, of course, there have been a change in the industrialization of Canada, where manufacturing used to be a hallmark of the economy, has changed significantly in the last 30 to 40 years and continue to change. So a lot of the manufacturing jobs where most unionized workers used to work have disappeared. There is still a lot of manufacturing jobs in the country, and unions got to be far more innovative how you get those workers to join unions. But at the same time, there's legislation that make it, of course, very challenging for workers to join union, despite what the Supreme Court have said many times in its own rulings that, it's a fundamental right of workers to belong to unions. I think laws have not kept up. But the reality, of course, there's other layers on top of that. Demographics, of course, are changing the composition of the workforce in the country. Gender is changing the composition of the workforce. So the union is dealing with many different challenges. And we have to be inventive. We have to be, of course, innovative at the same time as we continue to deal with the new world of work. And that world is not going to go back to the way it was. It's going to continue to evolve. So unions got to be in the forefront, recognizing its fundamental roles to represent all working people and to advocate for all working people as a way to build a brighter future in terms of wanting to represent more workers in the private sector, but also workers in the public sector. So
I heard you basically make 2 points there, Hassan, or Or should I call you Senator? What would you like to be
No,
called?
Hassan is fine.
Okay. One point was that governments have made it more difficult to form unions. And the second was that unions have not adapted to the changing economy. So can we take those two things and look at them individually? So first of all, what has government done to negatively impact the union movement? What policies are in place now that make it difficult to set up a union shop in Ontario, for example?
Well, in Ontario, and I would say right across the country, except there's two exceptions, Quebec and at the federal level. There's a two place where you can actually join a union by simply signing a union card. And if 50% plus one of the workforce sign a union card, the union could automatically be certified without the interference of the employer. This is an important part of the equation. In other places throughout the country, which is every other province except for Quebec and the federal jurisdiction, workers want to join a union, they could sign a union card, but ultimately they were going to go to a vote. And of course, employers are free to interfere in the right of those workers to join a union. They'll run an anti-union campaign. They will threaten workers with job losses, moving the facility, the likes goes on. And of course, what that does from time to time, it does change the workers' opinion, whether or not they want to take that risk. And more importantly, they want to join a union. Every time we have done survey, young people, people of color, women are far more predisposed to join a union without, of course, the interference of employers. The minute you add the layer of interference with employers, people's attitude change and are I guess we'll say a little bit risk averse to taking the risk. So this is a huge challenge in Ontario. It's a huge challenge, of course, throughout the country and other provinces. And more importantly, I think it builds on the anti-union bias that's been there for quite some time. And I think it's critical for our governments to recognize if a worker wants to join a union, should be their fundamental right as part of our democracy.
But what's wrong with a vote? If you could just help me, just walk me through elementarily, why is it wrong to have a vote?
Well, there's nothing wrong with a vote if the employer would remain neutral and not interfere in the right of the worker to make the decision. 99% of the time, employers do interfere. They offer their opinion. They do all kinds of things to circumvent the union. They use their supervisory staff to undermine the efforts of the union and, more importantly, make it very difficult for the union to be certified. They threaten the workers with job losses. They say, well, we'll move the facility to someplace else. We're likely to lay you off. If you get a union, all the things you have today might disappear. Now, for a worker to try and navigate through all those legal avenues to determine what their rights really are that are protected is hard for them to do so. And more importantly, in the context of when you're worried about looking after your family and paying your bills, I don't think those are the kind of things you want to worry about. So there's all these challenges union face. But despite all of that, there's some positive news. Union has still maintained density at 30% in this country, despite everything that has been thrown at it. The deindustrialization of the country, of course, the anti-union animus from employer. They still maintain density at 30%. But I would simply say, well, I celebrate that. It's not good enough. We got to do far better. I think
it's mostly public sector, though, isn't it, Hassan?
80% of the unionized membership of the country comes from public sector in the country.
Right.
So the private sector is today anywhere between 16 to 80%, and they're the ones who've got to do far better in attracting new members. Isn't
that a dangerous position to be in, where most private sector workers don't have the benefits of a union and public sector workers do? Do you worry about private sector workers essentially feeling that they're disadvantaged or that public sector workers are advantaged relative to them?
Well, I would put it this way. Listen, in order to have a strong public sector in this
people
country,
can get mad at the wrong people sometimes, right?
True, and it does happen quite often. But I think you need a strong private sector as you need a strong public sector. Each complement each other. In other words, if you don't have the tax base, you don't have these workers, of course, making a better than average wages. Of course, how do we pay for the programs we have in this country? And without a strong private sector, the public sector is not going to have the allies they need when they get into issues and challenges, negotiating their collective agreements and maintaining the benefits and stuff they have with their employers. Because people say, why are you having that when we don't have it? And that led me to one of the arguments in the work we took on as a Congress. I spent 10 years of my life working to expand the Canada Pension Plan. It was the most incredible campaign we ran. And people said, why are you interested in employing so much resources and efforts and energy to expand Canada Pension Plan? Because I said, if Canadians don't have a better pension when they retire, none of us are going to have a pension, because eventually they're going to demand, why the hell should you have something when I don't have it? And of course, the campaign was successful, a large part because there was a recognition among Canadians was the right thing to do. But we brought government of all political stripes to see this was the right thing to do for the country overall.
Hey, throw me a bone here. Kathleen Wynne's initiative was a big part of it, right?
It was huge, huge. And it also complemented the other efforts that was going on in the country. Of course, Stephen Harper at the day ideologically was blinded by his ideology rather than recognize was the right thing to do, stop the efforts from proceeding. Of course, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau getting elected, we got new momentum, and Kathleen came along to say, listen, we need to figure out how we can get this done. And we did get it done in 2016.
Yep. Are you surprised by the lack of militancy among Canadian workers? They seem to be always on their back heels with management, willing to take things that they previously in decades past wouldn't have taken without strikes or without action. And I mean, I had a guy named Thomas Frank on this show a couple of years ago, and he's a sociologist, and we were looking at the underlying sort of state of life of most people, most working people, and we were like wondering, where is the revolution? Like, when is the revolution happening? But yet people aren't in that frame of mind, are they? They're not fighting for their rights in this regard.
Well, I think, if you have a job and you're making a fairly decent wage and have, basic rights in your workplace, people are, again, figuring, hey, who do I compare myself to? The guy who have less than me or the guy who have more with me? So there's some degree of satisfaction among union members about where things are at. They're not in the worst state. Of course, every so often there's some terrible disputes that detract from most of what happens in labor relations in this country, where employers are fairly amenable to negotiating a new agreement. But of course, the days of long strikes, lots of strikes in the country, it seems like it's been gone from our Canadian history for the most part. Now, the reality is, of course, is that when employers are not sharing in the spoils in terms of the profits, you're going to see more militancy. Public sector workers, for the most part, are doing relatively well. Most governments are sitting down, negotiating collective agreements. These workers have pensions, they have benefits, they have some job security. So the kind of, action you would see against governments or employers are not traditional. But more importantly, I think unions are going to have to push hard. This pandemic certainly have exposed the gaps within certain sectors of society, but it's also exposed some gaps within certain segments within the labor movement. We've seen it in home care, where these workers are to a good part unionized, but yet the working conditions and their salaries does not match their skills and their ability and the work they're performing on behalf of for their employers. So we have to, unions got to mobilize their members to take on those employers, because it's not a lack of profit to pay these workers a better wage. These employers have just decided they're not going to share in the spoils unless they're pushed to change their behavior and their habits, I think, to a large extent.
But they're not paying any price for that right now.
Well, right now, they're not paying a price for it. And I think to a large extent, unions have recognized their fundamental role right now is to help us get through the pandemic. There's a crisis in the country in long-term care. There's a crisis in the country in how we provide for people's needs during this pandemic, and unions want to be responsible in how we respond to that. So I think we have an opportunity after this pandemic comes to an end to say, hey, if you're not going to do better, we're going to have to take you on in a way to get the message out that we can't allow our members to continue to be exploited when you're not treating them properly. They don't have basic sick days in many of these facilities across the country.
I worked on a hell of a lot of files in my political career in a hell of a lot of sectors that you could describe as investing in Canadians. Agriculture, transport, health, the list goes on and on. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has been investing in improving digital connectivity for Canadians since the year 2000. Nearly $240 billion nationally in network infrastructure, operations, and spectrum. And now they've just announced an additional $54 billion investment through the end of 2024. Those are enormous numbers, but it's the impact of that money and how it will continue to improve how we connect with each other, learn, run our businesses, and stay healthy. That's the thing that's so impressive. More numbers for you. 529 new urban and rural communities are slated to get TELUS's blazing fast 5G network by the end of this year. 1 million more homes and businesses will be connected to their pure fiber high-speed internet, pushing the total to over 3.5 million premises. Right across Canada, these investments are going to do more than expand network coverage and speed. They'll create jobs. TELUS will create thousands upon thousands of jobs in construction, engineering, and emerging technologies among them and their partners over the next 3 years. We're going to stay on this topic for the next few weeks because, let's face it, this stuff is important right now as we open up and our economy recovers post-COVID. I'll tell you some stories of how TELUS's investments are impacting communities all over the country. For now, you can go to telus.com/connectingcanada to learn more. So we know what the situation is for young people and in precarious work and everything, but the situation in Canada now is so tilted against traditional labor benefits that Jerry Diaz had to lead a strike that went on for months against a co-op in Regina that was trying to take away the defined benefit pensions from its workers. So if the labor movement's fighting co-ops, we're down to the last strokes here, aren't we?
I think you're right in that sense. I mean, the co-op strike was really a horrible strike for the workers, and their courage to take it on. And by the way, a provincial government who aided and abetted the employer in their behavior. That strike could have come to an end much earlier. The province could have intervened. The Minister of Labour could have said to the parties, hey, listen, folks, I'm going to set aside what the differences are. You're going to find a way to resolve this either by yourself or with a mediator, or I'm going to actually legislate a settlement ultimately to support these workers, because there's no justification in what that employer is demanding when you recognize the profit they were making, but equally a workforce that's been productive, made sacrifices in the past to ensure they could keep their defined benefit plan, and only to see this employer come at it again, only simply to increase the profit margins at the expense of these workers who wants to build a future for their families, and of course to ensure that community will benefit from their hard work. So again, it could see when governments can take the side of workers and support them, or the government can be an aid and abet an employer who wants to destroy the efforts that the unions have made in the gains of the past. And I think that was a terrible strike. I was out there on the picket line supporting Jerry and uniform members. But equally, I think it shows at the end of the day, when you got a determined employer and a government who are aiding and abetting them, it could be a terrible situation for those workers. And I think what happened there was simply unacceptable.
Okay, so give us a little roadmap forward, if you would. I talk to a lot of economists on this show, and I bet you that one could form a consensus around people who study the economy that the balance between labor and management has gotten way out of whack, and it is affecting our society structurally, and that it would be an important thing to do to strengthen the union movement, strengthen the labor movement, and reinsert some balance in that relationship. I think a lot of economists agree with that. How do we get to that point? This is a little bit building on what you talked about earlier about the labor movement adapting, but it's also what kind of policies would be around. I mean, how are you going to help an Uber driver someday?
Well, I think there's two parts in responding to this. One, I think I can give some examples that could point to the direction, but equally unions have to be adaptive in how they respond to the challenges and this time that we're living in. When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau got elected as Prime Minister, he made a commitment that he was going to repeal some of the terrible legislation that the Harper government had brought in against the labor movement, Bill 377 and Bill 525. And within immediately of taking office, he decided to embark on a journey to say those two pieces of legislation will be, of course, expunged from the government legislation, and did so. What it did open up at the federal level is the right of unions to unionize workers if workers chose to do so at 50% plus one, taking away the anti-union legislation. But also what he could not do is union movement have to do this. We now have to build and now have positive legislation to help us organize workers in the federal jurisdiction. That was all right. Now, by the way, even the employer did not demand that the government take away these things that was there in terms of automatic certification. But at the same time, I think we have to push to change, and of course, the legislation framework in the federal jurisdiction. One way to help the Uber driver, and I've been arguing, and I hope in the upcoming campaign, the federal government will take this, but also the Prime Minister in his platform will lay out. All we have to do, by the way, two simple things. One is to ensure that Uber is classified as an employer. So they will have to pay premiums to their drivers, because these are workers who work for Uber. So if they start paying unemployment insurance premiums, I mean, when those workers should be laid off or don't have a job, they can collect benefit. It also defines Uber as the employer immediately, because one of the biggest problems we're facing in this country, who is the employer, because the legislation is absent how to define that. Secondly, of course, those workers will have to start paying CPP premium. But Uber will have to pay their portion of that premium. It means those workers are now in the system. They're covered by the federal labor code. They'll be covered by provincial code, because now you deem them to be the employer. Automatically, the Uber drivers, the Fedora workers, others who work in that precarious sectors, automatically is deemed to be under the employment standard and provincial legislation. Automatically, they can't escape responsibility. Now, at the end of the day, the Uber drivers got to take some responsibility. Now that they're covered, to have these basic things covered for them, how can those workers, of course, become part of the labor movement they chose to? As a matter of fact, some unions are reaching out to them. UFCW have actually filed certification application for Uber drivers to join their union. Automatically, those workers now can, of course, they see the benefits. But equally, I think unions have to work with progressive government to bring forward legislation and our employment standards right across this country. The only one place where employers can't misclassify workers under their employment standard legislation is in federal jurisdiction. You cannot misclassify. It's illegal under the Federal Labor Code Part 3 to do so. But that came about as a result working with the federal government to make their legislation conducive to the changes that's happening to precarious workers in our society. We've got to do more at the provincial level, because 90% of the workforce today work in provincial jurisdiction. And provincial legislation has not kept up with the changes and the challenges that workers are facing, but also the evasion of employer not to take any responsibility for people working under their direction and their control. So we've got to do more, but the labor movement also have to be adaptive to say, how do we bring those workers within our ranks? They have to ensure they have organized or reflect the diversity of those members. They also have to ensure that women workers who are joining their ranks see a place in the union leadership. They they're elected, they're participating in the leadership of the union.
Is that an issue? Is that an issue?
I think it's an issue. I mean, listen, I was fortunate to be the president of Congress, but I know I was an anomaly. Is the next president of the Congress going to be a person of color? Right now, there isn't, but I think every worker of color should aspire one day they want to lead the labor movement or to lead their own union in some ways. And unions should make it possible for that to happen. I had to overcome many barriers, but the reality is it should be the same for women. It should be the same for a person of color or an Aboriginal person that said, hey, I want to become a union leader. If I have the skills and ability, why can't I? So we have to deal with the challenges that society is dealing with in terms of prejudice, but equally, we also have to make it possible for doors to be open, for workers to be able to walk through those doors to take their rightful place within the labor movement.
Why haven't sympathetic governments, and I'm going to pick on John Horgan because he's in office right now, but I could easily be asking it about Notley when she was in office. Why hasn't Horgan put in place the kind of labor laws you're looking for?
Well, I think too often, governments get complacent. The rhetoric overtake their actions, and I think there's no justification why the NDP government in BC haven't changed their legislation to make it easy for workers to join union, but also to deal with precarious employment, which is one of the biggest issues I think facing the BC workforce in this country. If they don't know what to do, just take lessons from the federal government. Lots they can learn, by the way, how to deal with these issues.
There must be a reason why they're not doing it. Why do you think?
I think too often, they're, as they get elected and then they're governing on behalf of everybody, trying to recognize, of course, if you are supposedly preaching the gospel that you're the Workers' Party and you're representing workers, I think you should act more like it. And by the way, show some resolve that you're going to deal with the things in a much quicker manner. No, they have done some good things, that they could do more. He brought in temporary measures around sick days. Now, temporary measures, I will say, okay, it's better than no measures, but the reality should be permanent measures in the BC Labour Code. Similarly, the right of workers to join a union, the 50% plus one, should be an automatic thing in BC at the end of the day. And more importantly, misclassification of workers by their employers under the BC Labour Code should be something of the past. It should not be of this present government. So they've got lots to do, and they should get on with the job of showing the resolve that they're going to make it easier for workers to enjoy the basic fruits of their labor, given that they're helping these employers succeed enormously during this pandemic.
Is this an example of why you don't think that the labor movement and the NDP should be formally allied?
Well, I think that workers are quite capable of deciding when elections are happening as to who they should vote for. I think the union movement have a responsibility to talk about the issues that are important for workers. When I was at President of Congress, we led many campaigns that identified issues at election time that we think workers should identify that with their ballot. But I don't think I'm smart enough to tell every worker in this country who they should vote for. I think they're quite capable of making that decision.
Will you tell them not to vote Conservative?
I tell them not to vote because I see the parallels of against their best interest. But I think on the rest of it, I think they should be able to make a choice for themselves without me directing them, because I don't think my wisdom are any greater than theirs in regard to where they're going to cast their ballot. And I really think that this is something that we need to do a better job at. I think the rhetoric, if you really want to get workers to be engaged in an election and why they should engage, you should go out and talk to them. I spend a lot of time every election going out to talk to workers about the importance of the election and what's at stake, and more importantly, how they can make a difference in the choices going to make, recognizing how government action could really cost them a lot in regard to their self-interest. But at the end of the day, I think for them to make that decision, I think it is the right and the role of political parties to try to convince those workers that they should join their cause at the end of the day. And I think there's a need for us to find a balance as to how we engage. I think politics is very important. I just think I should be so blatant as to tell somebody, I know best how you should cast your ballot. I know the parties are against our self-interest, but I think there's on the other side, the workers can make a good choice at the end of the day when they go cast that ballot.
You know, Chantal Hébert wrote something that I thought was quite wise about this. Let me run it by you and see what you think. That the modern conservatism has changed this equation. Yes. That, let's say, post-Harper conservatism in Canada has changed this equation. That in the days of the PC party, organized labor said, the Liberals and the NDP Liberals and the Conservatives are pretty much the same. We see the NDP as our vehicle for social change. And in the post-Harper era, the labor movement says conservatism is an existential threat to working people. And what we need is to block conservatism. So it went from being pro-NDP to anti-conservative because the conservative threat became greater. Make sense?
Well, exactly. But let's put that in context. In the last going on 6 years since Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been elected, he's repealed all the anti-union legislation that was at the federal level. He expanded the Canada Pension Plan. He brought in a proactive pay equity legislation that's going to do the most to improve the economic well-being of women in the federal, public, and private sector in this country. He's changed legislation in regard to dealing with harassment in the work. For the first time in history in this country, the people who work in his office have the same right as other workers in the federal jurisdiction in terms of legal protection. We've rolled back the Harper regime desire to change when people can get their OAS from 67 back to 65. We've given the poorest seniors in this country the largest raise they've seen in GIS. My mother is one of those people. She's 97 years old, or young, I should say, this year, and got another increase most recently as a result of her age. But more importantly, I can go on the list in regard, amend the Canada Labour Code to make it to stop misclassifying workers. Of course, we're still dealing with some of the issues in bringing the Canada Labour Code up. There's a $15 minimum wage now in the federal jurisdiction. He stopped precarity at airports where the employer could simply flip a contract when the contract expires, give it to another employer, and of course, downgrade the workers' wages and working condition. That's no longer going to be allowed to happen in the federal jurisdiction. I can go on at length in terms of the gains we've made. Every single public sector units at the federal level renegotiated collective agreement that was expired under Harper regimes and make improvements to their collective agreements going forward. No, the work is not done. For the first time in this history, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and another national child care will be going forward. We've actually brought forth legislation at the federal level that actually says if you are victims of domestic violence, you're going to get paid leave and legally protected under the federal labor code, which is going to be the hallmark right across this country from a campaign the CLC have led throughout this for the last 6 years. All of these things speaks to what the labor movement aspired to and been demanding the government's act on. So I think workers got a lot to celebrate in how this government have taken, of course, the things that we were talking about and turn them into legislation. Now, there's more to do. The reality is, of course, workers are going to have to make choices when they go to the polls in this upcoming election, but equally to reflect on the new reality. As for the first time, we had a federal government over 6 years, by the way, are not preaching austerity, which we're seeing right across this country, except for maybe the exception in BC and maybe in one or two of the Atlantic provinces, where the public sector is not under constant attack that they're going to get laid off or their wages going to be rolled back. So we've made a lot of gains, and I think this Prime Minister has shown remarkable courage to stick to his agenda and a vision to say unionized workers need to make improvement to their lives, but equally I'm going to do my part to help them. But ultimately, they've got to take some responsibility to do their part if they want to grow the labor movement, equally if they want to make additional gains on behalf of their members.
But Hassan, Liberals are reformers, not revolutionaries. So are you telling me that the labor movement are now reformers, not revolutionaries?
Well, you know, if I think that the revolution could come anytime soon, maybe I'll join it, but I don't see the hallmark anywhere near to that reality. I think that we're recognizing we're living in a very fast-moving world that we have a lot of work to do to rebuild, of course, the labor movement to its one glorious height, where density was about 40% in this country. The only place where density is 40% today is in Quebec and in Newfoundland. So we've got a lot of places.
And people could live a life of some security.
Where people could live a life of security, but also people could know when they were going to work, they would have enough money to raise their family and have a decent standard of living. Yeah. I think right now we're all struggling with that reality. And how do we transfer some of the wealth? Government have an important role to play. But if the one way to transform the wealth from those who don't want to share it is to give workers an opportunity to join a union, it's the most transformative things you can do. And yet governments who preach rhetoric over and over seems to do very less to accommodate that reality, because they do everything to frustrate unions from getting to the point where they can organize more workers. So their job would be even less, by the way, as governments, of how we can transfer wealth from the wealthy to working people in this country. So we've got a lot of work to do, I think, to a large extent, and the labor movement has got to labor much harder because there's enormous challenges with demographic change, challenges with gender of the economy going forward, and challenges, of course, with the changing nature of the economy. I don't think this is an easy period for my colleagues, and I know they're working really, really hard, but I think we're going to have to do far more.
Erin O'Toole has tried to stand out from previous Conservative leaders by talking about labor, talking about working people, and identifying himself as an ally. Has he proposed or said anything that makes you think he's an ally of working people?
He hasn't said a single thing. His first message was divisive. He started off by saying that he wants the private sector workers belong in a Conservative party. And of course, dismiss 82% of the unionized workforce in this country, which is public sector. Public sector workers is what held this country together in the most devastating pandemic in the history of this country. They showed up to work, they took the risk, they delivered what was required of Canadians, but yet he can't even show 1 ounce of decency. Why the same Erin O'Toole was in the Stephen Harper cabinet that voted for all the anti-union legislation, that attack private sector workers and public sector workers. Aaron O'Toole have yet, of course, to apologize for 377, for 525, and all the things they've done. By the way, they made it illegal for public sector workers to help their members in regard to pay equity complaints that they would have. If they were to lend any hand, they would, of course, deemed to be violating the legislation. Yet Aaron O'Toole wants to say working people belongs in this party. Well, I think he needs to come to terms what his party has done. And by the way, efforts that he supports, he tried to tell us that, he comes from an auto worker's family in Oshawa. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Was his father a management person? I got nothing against his dad. But the reality, when Aaron O'Toole was sitting in the Stephen Harper cabinet and they were selling their shares that they own in General Motors, which could give the workers some security and some leverage with General Motors, he voted to sell those shares and, of course, took away that leverage. And General Motors said it was going to close the Oshawa facility. It was a result of what the Stephen Harper does. I don't think Aaron O'Toole has ever taken any responsibility to say he was responsible in part of their actions against attacking the workers in Oshawa. Now, at the end of the day, I hope he's learned something, that those actions, of course, is why workers don't have any trust of his government and his political party. Now, at the end of the day, he wants to show that he cares about working people. He should tell some of his, by the way, his conservative friends across this country, some of their anti-union rhetoric and attack on the labor movement is not keeping with conservative values, if these are truly conservative values. So is it about the election? I don't know. Or is it just more Aaron O'Toole wants to get union workers to come back to his fold and give him some votes in the next election? I don't know. But time will tell. If he's sincere about what he's preaching, I hope he should go one step further and tell Canadians how he planned to maintain his stand, regardless of what may be the outcome of the next federal election.
Okay. My last question, I don't mean it to be aggressive, but I just want to ask it. Right after you left the CLC head job, you got appointed to the Senate. And I raised this because, I think I was a pretty strong candidate for that Senate job myself, and you got it instead. And I'm just wondering how that happened. How does that go down?
Well, I don't know either. I mean, it's a good question. We have to ask people who made those decisions, and I was one of them anyway. I'm like many people, I put my name forward. I think my service to my country, my experience as a union leader, and the things I've done make me worried. But I think there are thousands of other Canadians and Ontarians, by the way, who equally could be qualified to be in the Senate. Ultimately, a decision was made. And I'm going to hope to do my best to serve my country, to serve my province, as I serve working people in this country as being a member of the Senate.
Why did you want to be in there? What do you think you can do?
Well, it's always a big question. I think my love for public policy certainly will allow me to engage in a very positive way how we can contribute to legislative initiative that the House initiate, but also where the Senate have strong opinions about ways and how we can improve legislation, but also how we can initiate legislation. But also to look at some of the big challenges going to face our country is in this next 20 or 30 years. There's some huge challenges coming that's going to face our country. Climate change is one of them. Our country continues to struggle as to how we meet our climate objective. I think it's critical that we do meet them. As a worker and a leader that came out of the trade union, I'm a strong advocate for climate change policies that's going to lead us into a much brighter and a better future, but we've got to take strong actions now to ensure we're going to do our part. Our country is changing demographically. The diversity of our country, I think, is an enrichment of what Canada is all about. But equally, how do we meld these new realities to this beautiful country that can become even stronger and more, I think, beautiful than it currently is by the cultures, linguistic language that people bring to this country, but equally the contributions they bring to build this country, the rich mosaic. How do we build and bridge the divide between First Nation and the rest of Canada? We've got to learn from our past. We can become a better nation as a result of what we are able to learn from the past. How do we heal the country in a way that First Nation actually actions from the past has been devastating to what this country's, I think, fabric is all about. How do we knit that fabric back together much stronger, much brighter so we can have a better future? But at the same time, how do we create jobs that can give people an opportunity to build a brighter future? I have a young daughter. I have no idea what her future is going to look like, but I know the realities, we can continue to seed the ground, a national childcare policy that would provide for families and for women into the future to have childcare available to them when they decide to have a family. I don't know if my daughter would have a family, but if she decides and we have a national childcare, I know her future will be far better than it is today. If we're able to pass legislation right across this country to make pay equity a reality for women's lives, think of how it transformed women's life economically. So when they retire, they're not retiring in poverty because they're paid for their full work. They will have a better opportunity. How do we improve the laws that deal with hate in this country so we don't have a repeat what happened in London, Ontario, where a Muslim family is simply drove over by some young man who decided his hate is so overwhelming, he's got to go out and kill somebody he's never met in his life. I feel for the family of that young man. I also feel for the families who've been destroyed in London, because I know no family raised their sons or their daughters or anybody in their family to become haters. But yet this is a reality of our new Canada, and we've got to take these things on. I think the Senate has an important role to play, but fundamentally we all have an important role to play as Canadians. And I'm hoping my experience and my knowledge of this country, my understanding of the diversity of it can enrich the work of the Senate, but equally enrich the work of our parliamentarians across this country so we can build and strengthen our country in the role that they can play in the Senate. I'll do my best at the end of the day, whether I'm successful or not, time will tell, but I'm hoping my contribution will be a positive one.
Okay. Just a word of advice. If I were you, I'd watch out for Dennis Dawson. He can get you in a lot of trouble, that guy. So just give Dennis a bit of a wide berth there.
Make a note of it.
Yeah. Hassan, I got a little chance to work with you when Kathleen was the premier, and I have always found you to be such a positive and constructive force trying to move the needle on behalf of working people. I'm really, really pleased that you agreed to come on the show and talk to us about it. And it was lovely conversations. Thank you very much.
As always, my friend, I think this is a wonderful country. I thank you for the work you do on behalf of Canadians and allow us to have conversations, because I always says, you can't really learn about someone if you don't take the time to listen. I know from time to time we tend to talk over each other, but I'm hoping we do get a chance to listen. We all have an important voice in this country, and as working people in my whole life, which I spent advocating for, I know we contribute enormously to the fabric of this great nation of ours, and I think we need to listen to each other, because I think we can continue to build an even greater country that we have done for the last 154 years. So thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. Let's work on that together.
Okay. All the best, my friend. Take care.
So, as we contemplate how to go about our lives after nearly a year and a half of sheltering in family bubbles and obeying a constantly shifting list of restrictions, a lot of us are now talking about the return to work. Will work from home, part-time or full-time, continue? Has daily commuting been permanently disrupted? Are the synergies of a normal in-person workplace too valuable to lose? Well, the operational employees of our sponsor, CN, know exactly what the next months will be like. They'll be just like last month, and the month before that, and all the months that have passed since March 2020. Because at a modern railway like CN, there is no question about how you do your job. You show up, no matter what the circumstances, and you move cargo safely. Anything else would stop the economy cold. The fact is, if someone has something, a train probably brought it. Grain and other crops, minerals, fuel, motor vehicles, small and large manufactured goods, food, imports, exports, all of them travel by train before making the last few miles of the journey by truck. CN also has a truck fleet, but that's another story. And right from the beginning of the pandemic, when so many of us were turning our homes into offices, thousands of CN's railroaders kept right on reporting for work. The trains ran on time, the veins and the arteries of the economy kept functioning. And now, CN is poised to merge with Kansas City Southern, which will extend its network beyond Canada and the US deep into Mexico. It's going to be good for the continental economy. Trains are green, and they are ever more essential. Just something to keep in mind. Well, it's Tuesday morning out here in British Columbia, where I am, beautiful British Columbia. It's a little earlier than normal for me to be doing this pod, and I may have been up late last night celebrating the hockey game. So I just don't know what you can expect from me today. But Jenni and Scott are here, and they will be fantastic. Hi, Jenni.
Hi.
Certainly your timing is perfect, Dave.
I'm already on, aren't I?
You're sharp,
I'm already doing
man.
it. I'm already doing it. Scott, are you going to sing Jenni happy birthday?
Happy, happy, happy birthday, dear Jenni. You are more beautiful than Tim Raines sliding into second base. This day, your face makes me so happy, happy, happy birthday.
Aw, thank you.
That was very nice.
That was beautiful. Thank you. And for anyone that's not watching and listening, I'm sporting a new Expos cap that my sister got me.
I love that logo, man.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do you think about last night? Come on.
What do I think? They're alive. That's what I think about last night. They're alive.
They're giving me false hope. That was a good game. And the final goal, the overtime goal, that was fucking beautiful.
Beautiful.
Scored a lot of beautiful overtime goals this playoff.
So.
Boy, the Tampa Bay players sure do move Caulfield around the ice like he's a toy, though, eh? He looks so small out there. He's got to get some ice sooner or later and score one, though.
Well, he got the assist. He got the assist on the goal.
Yeah, he got the assist on the overtime goal. Yeah. He's Dr. Overtime, that kid.
And the first goal. He got the assist on Anderson's first goal.
Oh, did he? Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought it was Suzuki set him up.
No, I'm pretty sure Caulfield did.
So, listen. If they win Wednesday, people will start to say it's a whole new series.
That's right.
Right? And then if they win on Friday, Tampa Bay will fold like a cheap suitcase.
Right. And then I'll burst into fire. I'll be so happy. I can't live the rest of my life. If the Habs win the cup, I'll just have to stop it there because it won't get any better than coming from 3 down. There'd be nothing in my life that could possibly compete. So I would lose interest in the balance of my existence. I have summited.
It would be like your chart of the prime ministers in your house that ends at 2006.
That's right. Just the last picture is Paul. To present, it says underneath it. To present. You're fucking right. In my house, to present.
And in my house, the charts of prime ministers start in 2006.
We are, while this show is being recorded, going to get an announcement of who the new Governor General is. So we'll be alert, I guess, to our devices to see what that is. But we all assume it's got to be a pretty safe appointment, right? They don't want to have a controversy on something like this on the eve of an election campaign.
No, and for that reason, I think it will be Keanu Reeves. Because as we know, he can do anything. I mean, if you've seen the John Wick movies, you know how resourceful he is.
And he never ages. Like that man, fantastic. He looks exactly the same as he did in Bill and Ted's Adventure.
I know.
It's such a weird time, though, right? Because they have to pick somebody who's absolutely safe as houses. Like after the Julie Payette cock-up, you cannot have somebody that causes you even a smidge of controversy. They've got to be qualified beyond question. But at the same time, the moment sort of begs, something symbolic and important, Indigenous matters. But how the relationship between Crown and Indigenous makes an Indigenous appointment complicated. In some quarters, people say no. Lots of Indigenous leaders say that would be absolutely wrong. So, I am curious to see. It ain't going to be Roland Michener, right? Like, it won't be kind of like, okay, who's the oldest, grayest guy we can find? But it's got to be as safe as the old gray guy like Roland Michener. So it's an interesting task. And
they'll have to speak French. There's no way they want to go into the next month with just a story out of Quebec where Trudeau's appointed a governor general that's unilingual. Like it's just not. I don't think it's on the cards. Cards,
and no beating on staff. Like they want to steer around that.
I think speaking French is more important than that, though.
That's traditionally been my experience on the Hill.
So, is Trudeau's on a campaign swing, right?
Listen, you watch that as I take away partisan political hats and what have you. You watch the last 5 days that they're doing. He's got a videographer. They're taping B-roll. Like, he looks good. He's got the beard off. And I was back in Finland for almost a week, and it would actually come up with people I would talk to that aren't political. They're like, oh, young Justin's shaved off his beard. And it's like, he's campaign ready. And like, he's even his shot of getting the vaccine, like, he has his sleeve rolled up. He's defined his tattoo. He's sitting, his hand is kind of placed right beside his junk. So you're kind of like really seeing like the sexy look. And
he's flaunting all his attributes. Well-muscled, beautifully tattooed.
And every event, even yesterday, Omar Algebra's event, his announcement for the high-speed rail, which, Jesus, people have been studying, announcing, and talking about for as long as I've been involved in politics. And even it was campaign ready. It was a very clever way to do it. He did it. He did the announcement on the train. I think he had a 14-hour train ride, the poor bastard. But they are in full flight.
I thought he was calling for service. Could someone just please come to my seat with a cup of water? I'm going to fucking die here before this announcement get made. It's been my experience on the train, but yeah. But it's not high speed. It's high frequency. So we're going to use the same rails. You're just going to make the trains go faster. But doesn't that sound like, don't make that safe though, right? Like, it isn't just like a Spider-Man movie. We'll just speed them up and hope that everybody hangs on.
Don't be so cynical. There are people in Windsor who are desperate to get to Quebec City quickly.
That's for sure. Bonhomme. You know, it takes me 9 hours to see Bonhomme now. You can chop that to 6. I'm there. So la.
So you guys have to be seeing the same thing. Like, and if you look at the polling numbers, it's like, we talked about polling last week. But like the polling numbers, like there's been another 3 polls, I think, that have come out since last Tuesday or last Monday when we talked, and they're pretty much the same outside of BC. BC's a little bit like the pollsters don't have agreement there, but everywhere else is an agreement. So it goes back to, if you're the Liberal campaign, if you're Trudeau, you're looking at it like, I need to go as soon as possible because I'm never going to I could lose the window where I'm sitting at between 37 and 39, and the Tories are between 25 and 27.
Well, there's a number of polls. David Aiken has a tweet out this morning that shows 3 or 4 polls all saying exactly the same thing about the Liberal vote and the Conservative vote and the NDP vote. Some variation by region. I don't think anybody really knows what's going on in British Columbia, for example, but everything else appears to be pretty consensus. Atlantic's not competitive. Quebec's a 2-way fight with the Liberals in the lead. Ontario is a Liberal blowout. The Prairies are unexpectedly tight for the Conservatives. I mean, these are knowns. And 25%, Jenni, Jesus Christ, that's a stock day number.
Yeah, it is. It's Canadian Alliance 2000 numbers. It is. I said it last week. It's horrifying. I'd be horrified if I was sitting running Aaron's campaign. And so they have to be in somewhat of a save the furniture kind of mode right now. I can't see how they wouldn't. And I'm not sure kind of where because you speak to people. And it's evident that they're spinning the media, and it's not a half-hearted spin. Like, they're like, our internal numbers are different. We're seeing different things. And so I have to only assume, and this is me making an assumption. And David, give me your thoughts. No offense, Scott. I'm just saying, like, from a campaign numbers point of view.
It's fine. It's all right.
No,
I'm making tarts. I'm going to go check on them. We'll be back from the oven in a minute. I think they must be. So if they have hired British strategists that are coming in and directing things, you know what it would be like if all of a sudden someone said, David and Jenni, I want you to come and run a campaign in South Africa or, some other country that we didn't know anything about. We would look at past election results and we'd give our best guesses based on the kind of the variables that you would see in the numbers, but we wouldn't have any on the ground concept. We wouldn't know actually what was happening there. We wouldn't know the incumbency factor. We wouldn't know what the issues are. We wouldn't have known what the history is. We wouldn't, any of that kind of stuff. And it seems that where the Conservatives are at is they're looking at past election campaigns and, looking at the numbers and not
really factoring in kind of anything else. And I'd be curious to what you would think in terms of the NDP numbers, because I also think they seem high. And in going back and kind of looking at the polling numbers leading into the 2019 campaign, it's kind of the opposite of the Conservatives. The NDP always poll a bit higher, but do bet lower, and the Conservatives poll a bit lower and do a bit better. So, it'll be interesting to see where we're at. But I think the one constant is the Liberals are sitting right now in a massive majority territory.
Jenni, there's so much to delve into what you said. There's so many pieces there. I'll just start with one that is, I think, kind of startling, which is the NDP have almost as much support as the Conservatives do. And there's the Bloc and the Greens also. This Liberal government, with $350 billion annual deficit, is straddling the center of Canadian politics. All of us think this is a left-wing government. All of us think this is a left-wing version of the Liberal Party. But in Canadian terms, this is the center. They actually have, according to Abacus, 20% of the vote of people who think they're right of center, who describe themselves as being right of center. So I think where the center is in Canadian politics is a really interesting thing. The second thing is what you said is about the NDP. They are, for the Liberals to be cruising to a majority government, the NDP are shockingly high. Normally, they would have to be in bad straits for that to be happening. And so I think it's really interesting what kind of composition, if it ended up with the NDP getting 20% of the vote or thereabouts, it's going to be an interesting and different House of Commons at the end of that. And the NDP, who I thought were written off for dead just a few years ago, seem to have real life in them, and their support's growing. So that's interesting. That's interesting to me. But what's also interesting to me, and this plays off your British strategist thing and what they would be missing. They might be missing the same thing that I'm missing, which is if you look at polls that ask more questions than just who you're going to vote for, and ask people what they care about, what they're worried about, what they want to see happen, you would find that one of the biggest concerns people have is the cost of essentials, the rising cost of living, and affordability. Same as it was going into the last campaign. That's gone nowhere, that issue. If anything, it's been accentuated. There's significant concern about the level of the government's debts and deficits. Canadians have not accepted the free money paradigm, that these things don't matter, and there's significant levels of concern about them. And you could probably run on lower taxes given the concern about affordability. So I don't see the underpinnings of this bad a Conservative beating. Scott, you always default to, well, Trudeau's found a comfort zone where people think he's in the right place. But there is something that the Conservatives are doing wrong, talking about a core set of issues that are their issues and appear still to have some salience. All right, my rant is over. I'm done.
Over to you, Scott.
Well, when you're trailing women and men, when you're trailing every demographic, including older Canadians, I think one of the things that if you're British, you ask yourself is, which one of these places do I start? Like, which is the vote that is most gettable? Which one can I recoup first? And by recouping it, does it in order to recoup the most gettable vote, do I have to do and say things that will make me untouchable to other demographics that I absolutely need in order to finish well? So they need to do two things. And this is, again, like if you don't know the country, I don't know how you make this judgment. They're going to have to come in and they're going to have to say, all right, we're going to have to shape our message and our appeal to ensuring that we gather up some of this ground that can be reclaimed. But by doing so in a way that leaves us at the end of that, let's assume we're successful in that effort and we get back some territory, then we haven't in the process made ourselves absolutely unappealing to others. And so what's the Venn diagram of the gettable vote, but that leaves you in a good spot? And, I think it's older Canadians. Like, I think that you've got to start saying things about protecting people's future, on the cost of living, all those things. But, now I'll go on my rant. So I think that the Conservatives are doing something really interesting right now. And in all honesty, I think they're being a little bit innovative. When you take a look at their social media stuff, and they've gotten a lot of grief from people, a lot of slagging about their social media, but they are attempting to use a free media platform that's available to them to do stuff. So they're doing these kind of almost TED Talk PowerPointy kind of conversations where O'Toole will front a conversation. And he did he's done one on the economy. He's done one on Canada Day, and he's done one on, Chinese scientists in labs and stuff, which may be an important issue, but I don't really know what he's getting at there. It sounded a little conspiratorial and kind of kooky and stuff. I'm not sure I want the leader fronting that. Let somebody else plow that ground, frankly. But they're using it, and I look at it and I go, this is kind of interesting. It's not quite Boris Johnson doing the folksy talk to the camera thing. It's not quite as staid as a PowerPoint presentation from somebody. There's something interesting and innovative there. I think maybe there's something to it, but I think all you have to do is look at it and listen to it and go, well, there's no coherence. I can't extract, either in terms of image or message, a coherent thing that they're about. And so when you look at the Canada Day one, right? He's standing up there. He's like, who's asking whether Canada Day should be canceled? Who's asking why the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer? Who's asking why we're spending all this money and piling on debt? Well, all those things all kind of overlap and are contradictory. They don't take you into any, I kind of go, okay, well, I don't, who's asking where the fuck I am and why I'm talking to an empty room as though people are excited about me. So I don't, I don't get, there's not a coherence, and particularly around the economic message, where I think the Liberals are likely vulnerable, because if they just go on, hey, I've been in the right spot. So I would try to really hammer on the older voters and prey on those anxieties about, well, are we going to have the right economic balance going forward? Are we going to get this right? Is it going to be impossible for your children and your grandchildren to purchase a home because the prices are going to, but not make that a fiscal conservative message, but make that an affordability pocketbook issue. But I don't hear that coming from them consistently. And he's weaving all over the place. And then every other day, the guy's photographed in running gear. What the fuck are you thinking? Justin Trudeau has done...
No, but they photoshopped him so that he looked like a powerful man. He intimidated me when I first saw that man running toward me with that six-pack and those thighs. Oh, my God.
Yeah, his thighs. Monstrous. He looks like, he's just been mountain climbing. But for Christ's sake, why provoke the comparison with Trudeau, who's 6'1" and has cultivated an image of himself as fit and virile and intimidating? You're not going to win that fight. Show yourself doing something else that's appealing and interesting that doesn't provoke a contest that you're going to lose. Solve a Rubik's Cube or play the piano. I don't know what the fuck, but something here I am in running clothes. Now think of how I look standing next to Justin Trudeau. No, I said, every guy who looks like me knows you stand next to Buddy Hackett, not Burt Reynolds, and he's asking people to think about him and Trudeau in the same way. It doesn't make any sense. So there's no coherency.
There's a reason you and I hang around with each other, Scott.
Exactly.
I agree. You don't want to outjust. You're not going to out Justin Trudeau. So stop the whole trying to the comparison bullshit. I 100% agree with you. I think that though the problem with the kind of studio stuff, Scott, is it's actually not new. The new thing is he's just doing it based out of a studio. So he's really trying to have it both ways. He's trying to be the traditional, he's trying to be I'm going to be in a suit and tie in traditional media, and I'm going to try to do it, make it social media. And it doesn't necessarily translate into working. If you look at the three politicians that have the biggest social media presence in Canada, it's Trudeau, it's Pierre Poilievre, it's Michelle Rempel. If you were to go back and look at the last couple of videos that Pierre or Michelle put out, they're getting a lot more traction and than what Aaron does. So Aaron's trying to have I'm in a studio and I'm going to give you a video, and Michelle Rempel's holding up her iPhone and doing a 2-minute video on an issue, or going into a grocery store and talking about inflation, and she's getting a lot more traction. So their problem isn't really,
I think there's something interesting there, though, don't you think? I think he could do something with that, but I bring in his critics and say, let's talk about and make them shorter. I don't know. I don't think he has to be necessarily guerrilla like Michelle in order to make it work. I think he could do interesting things, but the underlying strategic message isn't there, and so makes no sense. But you have to have the
narrative. Listen, we talked about that last week. None of the parties have had a narrative, but we've seen one thing in the last week, and that was yesterday. It's Trudeau has started. We're starting to see a ballot question form for Trudeau, at least, because every party is going to have their own ballot questions. It's not like everyone. You're not running on your opponent's ballot question, although sometimes it may be similar. So Trudeau yesterday, he in his address, he's like, or in his avail, he's like, I think Canadians expect us to keep moving forward on our priorities, which are and have always been to grow the economy, create good jobs for Canadians, and climate change at the same time. So that's his jobs in the economy, and of course climate change, because that's their mantra. That's Trudeau's thing. So at least from the Liberals, we're starting to see what their ballot question is. We haven't seen that from the other parties yet. And if I was like sitting with the NDP and the Conservatives, I'm like, TikTok, come on, fuck guys. You've got to start talking consistent messaging. You have to say it so much that you have a guy like Scott Reid with a poker or an electrical, where you give a zap. You want, I assume you want, say the same fucking thing every single time you're talking in any medium, to the media, on social media, to supporters, to non-supporters, to business leaders, all the stuff they're doing. We're starting to see the Liberals do it. And they have the advantage because they have the power of incumbency, which is really, really big for them.
And can I just add one more thing? Sorry, Dave. Can I add one more thought quickly? Because I to Jenny's point about everybody, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe the Liberals are searching for it. It still feels a little broad to me. It still feels a little non-specific. They've got time to fill that in. But one thing for the opposition parties in particular, and then the government eventually too, I think right now is the time to pivot from critique to talking about the future, what we would do differently going forward. These are our 5 priorities or 3 priorities going forward. A lot of people were saying, oh, this NDP ad with Jagmeet Singh is really good because there's a lot of contrast to Trudeau. Trudeau promises, but Jagmeet delivers. I don't like it. And the reason I don't like it, again, is that it's almost a mirror image of the Trudeau message. Please thank me for what I've done. I don't think that's what people are focusing on. So you know what? We're all missing the problem. Here's what the problem is. And that's why my 4 priorities will be these. And I think the Conservatives in particular have got to really focus on that, because if they keep posting videos and talking about the 4 things that are wrong with Trudeau, they're going to let Trudeau just walk past them. They got to say there's a problem in the future that only we have the answer to, and that's why you must vote for us.
I agree with you, Scott, because Trudeau's walking past them now. He's walking past them with his giant chiseled arm, waving to them behind him.
With the Thunderbird and the needle in it.
I'm not 100% sure that's true of the NDP. So the NDP, and it's happened really without me noticing it, because I'm old, but they have taken ownership over the youth vote in the country. In the last 2 years, Jagmeet Singh has just picked Trudeau's pocket of voters under the age of 25. And they are amassing behind the NDP. Will they vote? I don't know.
Well,
sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't.
No, but
you talk about O'Toole on social media. Well, I think Singh has one of the most popular TikTok accounts or something in Canada. And he's a politician.
I like to call it the TikTok.
The TikTok. TikTok. They have a message that is resonating with young people in this country in a big way.
Well, we don't know that though. So we actually don't even know what their message is. Jagmeet Singh is cool. His wife is beautiful and all. She has a huge social media presence as well. I think she's actually designated an influencer, which I know what it is, but I don't know how one gets delegated. Designated. I don't know if it's a regulated thing or industry or not. But so here's the thing. Yes. The question will be, will they come out and vote? And you would know this better than me, David, but my guess is, depending on the poll, an online panel probably fares better for the NDP than probably a live sample poll. So if you're looking at a poll where the NDP are higher, it could be the result of an actual online sample as opposed to a live sample.
isn't this all the more reason why you want to have a sleepy election and call it in the summer? I mean, my critique of the Liberals, or my warning, my caution from a Liberal perspective is you can't just trust that people will let you have a sleepy, it's about nothing election and bank 38% that is in the polls now. Like, you can't trust that. You have to have an offering that's precise and that causes people to vote for you. But in a world where you don't want anybody else to capture traction, why wait until September? I know we've talked about this 3 times in a row on the podcast, but I honestly don't understand why they don't want a vote day prior to Labor Day rather than after Labor Day. Like, I would just, like, they're campaigning right now, and it will kind of get covered, I think, with the same level of intensity as what we're seeing right now. Like, I think there won't be a ton of difference. There'll be a little bit more coverage dedicated to the opposition parties. Why wouldn't you want to be burning up those 36 days right now and going, fuck, man, look at that one. That one didn't hurt me. Toss it over my shoulder. This day didn't hurt me.
I 100% agree. I'm the one that has said for like a month, I would literally be I'd have like a blanket and pillow sleeping outside, like, Rideau Gate or wherever the official residence is called now, and basically be like, are you calling it today? Can you call it today? I got some numbers to show you. You should call it today.
Yeah. It's appointing a governor general. Why not do it Tuesdays, right? Just say, well, while we're here, I've got a first piece of business for you.
Well, how much of the campaign do you think O'Toole's going to do from that studio? Is he going to be on tour, or is he going to do it from the studio?
Listen, it's hard to tell. So I hear that both, because of course now everyone's it's the rumble of what's kind of happening next, and you guys are probably hearing it too. Like, did you hear this? Did you hear that? So I heard that Trudeau and O'Toole will both be out in Calgary, either Thursday of this week. I think it probably makes more sense it's Thursday of next week. Because it's Stampede, yeah. So, which I'm going to be out for next week. Next week I'll be wearing a cowboy hat for the pod. So, you're starting to see more of you're starting to hear more and more about events. I think Aaron would probably be making a mistake if he decided to run, an 80% campaign out of the studio, because I think that things have changed. I think people's attitudes have changed. I think the world is opening up. I'm not saying we might go back to like kind of when we were doing campaigns where you've got, the first week and the final week, and you're trying to get like 3,000 people in a room. But I think that if you plan to run a campaign 100% virtually, I think it'll end up being a giant dud.
I think it's imperative that he get out and campaign, because right now it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, even his static images, and Jenni was joking offline with us like earlier this week about that one picture of him at a shop where the woman is like, he posts his pictures though it's good, but the woman is like, sorry, my husband and I, we have a small number of charities that we donate to, and you can try next door. Like, it's like, it didn't look good, right? And I think right now, all of these images, these, and the social media content he's generating, it's always him. And it's like, there's a certain hubris behind it. Like, there's a kind of a vanity of like, like, I'm going to present myself as athletic, and I'm going to present myself as daring and dominating, and he got to get other people to say that about him. No one is believing it when he says of himself, I'm bold and I'm good looking and I'm athletic. It's like, no. So get out with some other people where they can say, I really like you. You got some good ideas there. Like, he needs the imprimatur of others showing that it's okay to like him. Because right now, no one's given permission to pay any attention to the guy. And he's sort of yelling into the void, I'm here and I am really interesting. And people are kind of going, interesting. And it's like, no, you're not. So he's got to interact with humans.
I suspect the Liberal campaign's more worried about the NDP than about the Conservatives right now.
For sure.
I suspect that the Liberals, here's the situation. So it's 37 or 38 points
but are
for the
they worried?
Liberals.
Okay, so I'm asking right now though, how worried are there's different variations of being worried when you're like running a campaign. If I'm them, I'm not that worried generally. I'm focused on the NDP and the NDP ridings, but I'm not sure I'm worried.
Sure, fair enough. That's right. That's better terminology, Jenni, for sure.
Yeah.
Because it isn't. But here's the situation. The Liberals need every one of 37 or 38 points to win a majority. Like 37, the shocking
Right there.
thing in these numbers is not the Liberal number. Fuck, even Reid and I got 37, okay? It's not that big a deal, right? So what's remarkable is the Conservative number, right? And so that's what creates the opportunity. If it looks like the Liberals are going to win easily, it makes it difficult for the Liberals to do their normal suppress the NDP vote campaign if there's no threat of a Conservative government. The NDP have a bunch of voters who would like the NDP to be in power rather than the Liberals, but don't care that much, don't hate the government. So it's going to be a battle. The NDP have a bunch of voters that could actually switch to the Liberals if the Liberals appeared to be in trouble. But the Liberals have a bunch of voters that could probably leak NDP. And if I'm talking about 2 or 3% is all you would need. If the NDP went from 20 to 22 and the Liberals went from 37 to 35, the math is going to start to get weird. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably where they're focused. I wonder what kind of campaign the NDP are going to run. What are they going to say about the government?
Well, that'll be interesting because Singh has been somewhat underperforming. I think, I think he had a few good days during the campaign. I think he had a great event off after the first debate going on telecom and cell phone prices. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of where their head is at in terms of how they go after the Liberals, because the problem they have is that their voters, they've got to go after the Liberals. But their voters don't like them going after the Liberals. Their supporters want them going after us. They want them going after the Conservatives. And so Layton was able to eventually thread the needle. Like he did it well. Like everyone said, kind of a Sunny Ways campaign for Jack Layton. And if you go back and look at the 2011 ads in Quebec, they were some of the like hardest hitting ads against us for the campaign. So I'm not sure if Singh's been able to thread the needle. Also, because of the dynamic of the three-way race in BC and the fact that we're not 100% sure, we haven't seen any of the internal polling. Right. It'll be interesting to see what he does. I think BC is going to be a real place to watch during the campaign. And he and his wife haven't spent a lot, like you've seen over the pandemic. If you follow them on social media, they've been in Ontario a lot. They've been kind of
his numbers in BC are good, though.
His numbers in BC are good regardless of the poll. But it's interesting. So he's kind of in the last week. You've seen him and his wife have positioned to Burnaby. They're the TikToking and Instagram storing and hey everyone, we're in BC. By the way, oh look at that beautiful BC mountain. Like they're making it known. So I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of what he does in the pre-writ period in the month of July if he decides to spend his time in BC. Because if I were the NDP, I would basically have Singh almost 50% of the time, if not more, between now and election date in British Columbia. I think that is where they absolutely have their where they can grow, especially with the collapse of the Green Party.
Scott, what did the Liberals say about the NDP to keep that vote from growing?
I think that they had them off of the pass. I think they had them off of the pass, and I think one of the traps for the Liberals is to get governmentitis. And is to let me go back one step, because I think the smartest way for the NDP to campaign is to move from what they've been saying, which is we're the people that actually gave you the CERB and all these programs that got us through this thing. I think they should shift from saying that to we're the people that will continue it. Times continue to look unsafe and unsure. And all those people that you're mentioning, David, that are anxious about debt and what the implications of all this are, they'll find that unattractive. But I think there's 10 to 15% of the existing Liberal vote that's more than happy to hear that message of, okay, continuity until, there are going to be people who think the woods are 1 year deeper, right? And they'll be open to a message from somebody that says, we're going to continue this stuff steadfastly, right? Trudeau will get your vote, he'll get his majority, and then he'll fuck you at the drive-through. He'll rip those programs away the second he can. That's the way those Liberals go, right? And I will campaign now and promise you that we're going to continue those things, right? And we're going to use this moment to strengthen the social safety net, strengthen our economy. I'd make it an economic message, not a social policy message, but one that jives the social policy ambitions for that voter cohort. So if that's what they would do, and that's my assumption, and if you're the Liberals, then I think the Liberals have to insulate themselves against that. I think they have to start to lay out, some kind of timetable of assurance. They have to have something that trumps that debate, allows them to say, this is what we're going to be replacing this with. This is what the economic program is going forward. But if they just try to sail and say, we're going to taper the programs off, we're going to strike the best possible balance, that's going to give us a good jobs mix and a good growth mix, but there's nothing there, then I think they'll be highly vulnerable to it. So I think they need to add, and this is where these guys have always been reluctant, right? They never have a 5-point plan. There isn't a set of forward commitments. There isn't specificity. I mean, they do it on climate change, when they can make kind of relatively unaccountable commitments to, in 2035, we're going to have this and that. But I think on the core program extension, they're going to have to insulate themselves a bit on that. And that is tricky because for them, they've got a bigger constituency to worry about, some of whom will be saying, well, we can't be too spendthrift for too long. But I think the first thing they need to do is to insulate themselves against that attack, that they look like the people who will take the programs away and the NDP who will be the people who will keep them, because we just don't know. We don't know how vulnerable people will feel, and that might be appealing to folks. So that would be the first thing. I would try to, I would do a block strategy by having some program horizon of reassurance.
If they're delaying the election call, Scott, it may be because they're, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry, David. I was going to ask you guys a question. So if you're sitting right now, you guys are in the Liberal war room, and you're seeing O'Toole's messaging regarding, he's kind of doing the coalition messaging, which is a little bit different than what we had in 11. What do you think of it? And how do you respond to it? Does it help? Does Aaron's coalition messaging help you guys, help the NDP? Like, how do you look at like his like kind of foray into that?
I don't think it has the same feeling that it had when you were talking about an actual coalition, Jenni, back in 2008, right? When, I don't really understand this argument. It sounds mostly like most people in Canada are against us. They support the following parties.
We ran the coalition, though. That was part of our messaging in 2011. It was part of even our ballot question. Like, it was part of the narrative. And it was probably more timely because the leader of the parties were actually going to sign the coalition. So it was like, to be fair. But do you think this, so it could be, it's one of two things. Does it help the Liberals? Does it hurt the Liberals? Or is it so irrelevant it doesn't even matter?
I think the latter.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think it's white noise.
Like, because the way I look at it is, unlike your situation where there was some pronounced, at least among opinion leaders and media, there was, and if not broader set of voters, there was some established notion of what this coalition was, and then you could debate whether it was a threat or a benefit. Now
they all signed the documents.
That's what I mean,
last
right?
Signature, but they all signed it.
So there was some tangibility to it. He's got to introduce a concept that's not established. He's got to introduce a concept that this is how the spectrum divvies up. So then people go, oh, is that right? Then they have to accept it. Then they have to be convinced they care about it. Then they have to be convinced that that means that they're on his side of it, not the others. Like, I just think it's way too complicated, too many steps. And I think he's really super vulnerable on. So what the fuck are you for? Are you for tapering off the programs, or are you for extending it? Like, there's, again, like, I think that's where he's going to get peeled like a grape during the campaign. It's if he doesn't reconcile this, where he's at on the economic stuff, because he tries to talk it at both sides of his mouth, and I think he's just going to get punched in the middle of it if he keeps this up.
If the Liberals don't call the election today, it could be because they're taking your other advice, Scott. I hear they're close to getting a deal with Horgan on childcare. Well,
that would be, I think, as you know, I think that would be a real benefit and demonstrate some genuine commitment to that agenda, and actually give people a living example of, like, here's a kind of middle class benefit of us, not just like news conferences and stuff, and not just talking about what I did with the CERB, but like a forward, like, see, actually, you can get something out of this brand of government. So that
wouldn't that be a kick in the teeth for Singh if Horgan did a childcare deal with Trudeau on the eve of the election?
Oh yeah, no, it's to go to our discussion on BC. It makes things interesting. I think he could do a deal with Horgan, and I think they probably will never be implemented because it'll be like all the deals you guys make with the provinces that you make the deals. It doesn't happen. It's blah 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 blah. But yes, I think if Horgan is willing to make the deal with Trudeau, it is a slight to Singh, and it'll be very interesting. And Horgan has been Horgan has had the similar policies during COVID. And I hated to say the word because we almost got through an entire podcast without saying it, but I'm not trying to go into COVID. But he has literally had the same policies as Jason Kenney, but because he's been a dipper, it's been a different dynamic. And so I think it would be very, very interesting going in terms of the dynamic between the parties, because you wonder that is Singh going to get resources? Is Singh going to get any of the kind of stuff that parties can share provincially, so to speak.
Exactly. All right. Hey, it's time for our Hey Yous. Who wants to go first?
You guys go first.
Scott, fire it up.
All right, my hey you is to Stephen Lecce, Minister of Education here in Ontario. By my count, as a parent, it's almost precisely 2 months from the day that public schools will return. There's going to be a whack full of kids going back to school, presumably in class schooling. They will not have had vaccines. It won't have bled through to the folks who are under 12. So there'll be potential sources of transmission. We don't know what the school year looks like. We don't know what the options are in terms of online versus not online. We don't know what's being asked of teachers. We don't know if money has been invested in actually replacing HVAC systems so that the kids can breathe air as opposed to particles of disease. We don't know any of that stuff. All we know is that this government appears to say, we're spending billions of dollars all the time on education, and if we get a chance at any moment, we will fuck the teachers union. I don't want that. Get to work now. Cancel summer vacation, Stephen Lecce. Get to work now. Show me that you're working with teachers, with the teachers unions, with the schools, with the school boards, putting together an actual plan where you say, this is how we're going to make schools safer. This is how we're going to ensure that options are available. This is how we're going to actually think about what we teach our kids, and taking into account for the fact that the past 15 years have been a complete checkerboard experience in terms of what they may or may not have absorbed. This is what we're going to do for teachers who have been frazzled like a burnt rope. This is what we're doing. This is our plan. Don't show up on the 7th of September and say, here's what we're doing, and it fucks teachers, ha, 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 isn't that good? I want a plan. I want to see you working on a plan now. So that's what, as one parent, I would like to see.
There you go. Stephen Lecce, that's a fairly detailed set of marching orders there. Jenni, what do you got?
Well, my hey you, so it's going to be similar to what it was last week, but my hey you now is to Jagmeet Singh and Aaron O'Toole. Trudeau has now come out. He's given his ballot question. We know what the Liberal Party of Canada are going to be running on. They're going to be running on jobs, the economy, and climate change, and climate change, which they will try to all turn into one giant economic issue. And so I'm not going to debate what I think of their actual ballot question. My hey you is to them. We need to see your ballot question, regardless of whether you want it or not. We're heading into a campaign this time, probably in a month. We'll be into a campaign. So it's time that you start telling Canadians what your priorities are going to be, because the next 2 to 4 years are going to, considering the last 2 years, 16 months that we've had, are going to be very important. So let's start hearing from you guys what you guys stand for and what your priorities are.
Excellent. My hey you goes out to whoever is working on the Liberal platform, and that is, don't get too highfalutin. You're spending an awful lot of money on things that are good ideas, childcare, high-speed rail, various other things that are not really political drivers, not really vote getters. And most voters continue to have relatively prosaic concerns. Am I making enough money? Can I pay my bills? Is my kid getting good schooling? Can we afford housing? These are the things that are on people's minds, And these are the things they want government to be addressing. If the Liberals did anything to get to where they are, it's understanding that through COVID and providing those basic core supports to people. And that is, don't lose sight of that. Don't lose sight of the fact that people are worried about bread and butter, pocketbook issues right now. And make sure that you sound like you get that in the campaign. All right.
That's a good one. That's a good one, Dave.
It is a good one. And I love when you say highfalutin.
You sound like Foghorn Leghorn. Well, I say, with a hen, I'm here to be courting.
Oh,
I say,
so
boy.
great to hang out with you. I cannot
Jenny, how are you going to celebrate your birthday?
Oh, I got calls.
No, calls are no good. Drinks and revelry, friends and music, smoke rings and debauchery. Come on.
It'll all include that. I promise.
I hope so.
And I can't wait until the first time we get to all do this together.
I know. It's going to be coming up soon. It's got to be coming up soon. But I can't thank the two of you enough for joining me every week. You brighten me. You brighten my spirits. It's a lot of fun to see you and talk to you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's listened or watched. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. I want to thank the Air Quotes Media team for everything that they do to help pull this thing together. Thank anybody that gives us a shout out on social media or a rating on iTunes. And I would like to thank Cole Caulfield for obvious reasons.
Go Habs, go.
Go Habs, go.